Hey everyone, it's Hailey, and today is Bookmas Day 3, so I'm going to be giving you guys some wishlist recommendations. You guys on Instagram for something that you needed like a recommendation for. This is always so hard to explain whenever I do a video like this, but basically my idea for this video is that I would give you a recommendation, whether it's like something to add to your wish list or for like a gift for someone else or whatever. Essentially just like random suggestions. I love doing this video even like outside of Bookmas, just subscriber recommendations. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I just love getting you guys involved, and this is a great way to do it. So today I'm going to be giving you guys some recommendations off of that list, and I'm super excited about it, and I hope that it does indeed help you out. But of course, if you have any like additional recommendations for any of these prompts, please leave them down below, because it's always good to have more options, and I've only read so much and know like personally of so many books, so my personal repertoire is a bit smaller. So if you guys can contribute, then that's just awesome. Before I get into the video, don't forget to click the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I post, especially because for Bookmas 2022, for all of December, I'm going to be putting up a new video every single day. And you can also follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is just at Hailey and Bookland, like everything else, but that is where I'll ask for like prompts for any videos like this. So now let's just get into the recommendations. So first we have someone looking for a book that an artist would like, and this is like, it's so funny to me because I feel like I've read so many books that deal with art, but for a lot of these prompts, it was like the second that I was asked, I was like, I haven't read anything and I can't think of anything, which always happens to me, but I did come up with a couple of good ones for this. So first we have Love Life in the List by Casey West. This is a story about an artist who is trying to kind of break out of her shell. She's trying to be more experimental with things and is at kind of a turning point in her life, a transitional point, if you will, and it's just a really fun one with a romance thrown in there as well. But of course, art is like a really important part of the story. Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar also features a main character who is an artist, and it's more about like that main character trying to like find first love and everything, but he does have a real passion for art, and it is a story with a trans main character, which is always great to see. Next, someone was looking for a book with someone who knits or crochets as a hobby, and of course the very first one that came to mind for me was Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. This is such a cute romance, but it has knitting at the center of it because it's essentially about characters who have known each other like their whole lives. It's kind of a childhood friends to lovers romance, but the love interest, his grandmother has just died and she had this knitting shop, and the main character like really loved spending time there and everything, so now they're trying to actually save this knitting shop after her death, and it is just such a cute story of reconnecting, but also knitting is honestly so prevalent in it, and it was really, really adorable. Next is a book with main characters that have interesting jobs, and I could think of quite a few, and maybe they're just interesting to me, but I just decided to go with it. So first of all, The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston features a main character who is a ghostwriter, and I feel like, you know, there's a lot of books out there about writers, but you don't see very many that are about a ghostwriter specifically. I don't think I've ever even heard of one that is about a ghostwriter. So the job of this main character is also a pretty like important part of the story. She's actually a ghostwriter who also can see ghosts, and she grew up in like her family's funeral home and everything. Her dad has just passed away, so she's dealing with grief from that, and then she ends up seeing this ghost that kind of like changes everything for her. It's honestly such an awesome story, and also about like a pretty transformative time in her career. Night Owls by Jen Bennett is also about a character with, I wouldn't say it's an interesting job, it's more so an interesting hobby, but this is about an artist, but she loves like anatomical drawings. So it's actually Night Owls is the title of it in the UK, and I got this one when I was there a few years ago. In the US and Canada, I think it's called The Anatomical Shape of the Heart. But either way, such an interesting, like, different twist on, once again, I feel like a hobby that a lot of characters have, but like having it be anatomy drawings, so interesting. And she has such a passion for it that, like, I felt like I just had to mention this one, even though it technically is more of a hobby. Next is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This, of course, is about a character who is a weather girl, and I just felt like that was really different. Like, I honestly used to be obsessed with watching the Weather Channel and wanted to be a weather girl at one point in my life, so maybe that's why it's such an interesting, like, career for a main character to have to me. But yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun, and definitely, once again, the career is a pretty central part of it as well. And the final one that I wanted to talk about is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This features a main character who is a chemist by trade, and she loves chemistry, but since it's like the 1960s, there are so many barriers keeping her from that passion. So she does have this job that is being a chemist, but then she ends up having this reality show where she's teaching women how to cook, but she's also using that to teach them, like, more than just how to cook. She's using that to teach them chemistry and stuff like that. Super, super cool story, and I loved reading about a woman in, like, such a male-driven career and her just, like, breaking down those barriers in a time when it was really hard for her to do. It's just, I loved this book so much. Next is a book where the fantasy villain is the main protagonist. So the first one, although there's a couple that came to mind, of course, Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is the backstory of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, so obviously, like, a pretty prevalent villain figure that you're getting to know more about. But the one that I specifically wanted to talk about is Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. This is basically like a story where you're focusing on that evil queen character. The evil queen that you see in so many different kinds of stories. You're getting her backstory and, like, seeing how she came to be who she is, and it's just so fascinating, and definitely, like, the ultimate, you're getting the perspective of the villain. Next is one that is appropriate for around this time of year, but a book where people get snowed in or stuck in a snowstorm. So if you watched Bookmas Day 2 yesterday, I talked about The Chaos of Standing Still by Jessica Brody, which of course is a good, like, holiday. It's more of a New Year's story. Really love it. But it is about, there's this massive blizzard where all the characters are stuck in an airport together. So they're not, like, snowed in, but, you know, kind of snowed in. They are stuck at the airport because of snow, so I feel like it still counts. And then there's also You Can Go Your Own Way by Eric Smith. This book is about two characters who used to be best friends, and then there was kind of this whole blow up, and they used to hang out at this arcade, and it was owned by the father of the love interest, or the male main character. You might get his perspective, I can't really remember. But then the female character, her dad is, like, very wealthy, owns all of these, like, gaming cafes that the male main character hates, and essentially his family wants to buy out the arcade. So they end up getting snowed in the arcade together, and, like, having to face a lot of things that they had been running from over the past, like, couple of years or however long they haven't been talking. Next is a book with a writer or an aspiring writer, and once again, I feel like there's so many and I couldn't really think of all that many. Obviously, I was just talking about The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. That one is a great one that is about a writer, a ghostwriter specifically, like I said, but you also have Beach Read by Emily Henry, which is kind of the first one that comes to mind when I think of a book about a writer, because it features a main character and the love interest is also a writer. So the main character, she writes romance novels, and the love interest, he writes, like, the great American novels. So they end up, for the summer, switching what they're writing. She is going to try and write the next great American novel, and he is going to try and write a romance story. So writing is very central to it, but there is also, like, a lot more going on in the story, and Emily Henry is just really great. Like, she also has one of her books is about a travel writer, so she definitely writes about writers or, like, people with bookish professions all the time. I feel like as soon as I, like, look at the comments for this one, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, like, how did I forget get that one, but it's just when faced with that pressure, I forget. Next is a book for someone who likes Pokemon. So the first one that I thought of is a book that it's quite old now actually, but it's one of the first ones that I read when I started doing booktube. It had like come out around then, and that is Fire and Flood by Victoria Scott. I thought this was a really fun book, and it was described as like being like a dystopian or fantastical. I can't even remember if it's dystopian or fantasy, to be entirely honest, but I know it was described as being like Pokemon, and I did read it and I liked it, and there were like little animal companion characters, so I think that this would be a really good one. Next is a book for someone who loves Hollywood and celebrities, but not a biography, which no worries because I don't really read biographies, so I don't really have any recommendations for those, but the two books, or actually one is an author that I'm going to recommend. So first of all, Taylor Jenkins Reid, she has so many books that feature celebrities. Like Malibu Rising, I would say, is the least celebrity focused, although it is focused on celebrities. It's not like as much as the others, if that makes sense. It kind of is, I don't know. Basically, Taylor Jenkins Reid, she has a lot of books that are about celebrities. Even Carrie Soto, her most recent book, it's about a tennis star. And then of course Evelyn Hugo. Evelyn Hugo was like an old Hollywood starlet. And then we also have Daisy Jones and the Six, which is more on the music side of things. So she writes a lot about fame and does it very well. But I also wanted to specifically recommend Now That I've Found You by Christina Forrest. This was such a great book where you have a character who's trying to make it as an actress, and her grandmother is actually a big celebrity. So her grandmother was kind of like an Evelyn Hugo thing, like an old Hollywood starlet, really beloved. So it's kind of her running around and like trying to find her grandmother, actually, because her grandmother went missing. But there's a lot of like exploring Hollywood, exploring that life that is going on there. Next is a book that is set in New York City. So I can think of quite a few, and I don't normally pay that much attention to the setting of a book, but I feel like whenever it's New York, it's almost like New York is like a character itself. Like the story ends up being so much about New York. So since this person specifically asked for like not a romance, I kind of set aside like one last stop, because that one is set in New York and it is a romance story, but like it's set on the subway, so I feel like it's a very New York story. But one of the first ones that I thought of was Take Me Home Tonight by Morgan Matson. Now this one does have like a little bit of a romance plot line, but honestly I found the friendship and like the development of the characters to be the main story of it. It's about two best friends who they end up going to New York for one night, and they end up getting separated and losing their phones, so then they are just like in New York without phones or anything, like not able to get into contact with everyone. It's just these crazy adventures across New York City, so definitely a very New York City focused story. Next is a book with a to-do list or a bucket list. I definitely have read so many, but was having trouble thinking of any, and I also know that I have a lot that are on my TBR. I know that there's one by, I don't know if it's one of the authors, like it's kind of the same deal as 5 Feet Apart. So I don't know if it's one of the authors or like that same author duo who did it, but there's a story about a girl who her mother is dying of cancer or has died, and she ends up finding a bucket list from when she was in senior year. No, the mom did die. So she ends up finding a bucket list from when she was in her senior year of high school, and since she is now in her senior year, she decides to complete this list. So that one's definitely going to be more of a sad one. Love Life in the List by Casey West, which I was talking about earlier. That one also features a list, obviously, Love Life and the List. Since You've Been Gone, once again by Morgan Matson. This one has a list where it's about two best friends, and then like they're very connected. The one best friend is kind of living in the other's shadow, so that's the main character, and her best friend goes missing at the start of the book, so she leaves her behind this like to-do list, this summer bucket list, to kind of help break her out of her shell. And there's also the Loose Ends list by Carrie Firestone, which is about a character whose grandmother, she is dying as well, and she's like trying to tie up loose ends and everything, and has this list to do so. So yeah, there are a lot of books with lists, but those are the main ones that came to mind, although I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of them. Next is an emotional Christmas book, and this is one that I didn't particularly like because of the emotional aspect. When it comes to a Christmas read, I feel like I'm looking for something that has more like happiness, you know, happy romantic feelings, and this one wasn't what I was expecting it to be. That was another part of it. So that is The 12 Days of Christmas. I can't remember who the author is, but I remember reading this a couple of years ago, and it is a really, really sad Christmas story. Like, definitely if you're looking for emotions and a Christmas book that is going to make you cry, that is the one for you. It was good, it just like wasn't what I expected. But if that's what you're looking for and you kind of know going into it that it's gonna be sad, then you will probably enjoy it. Next is a book that is about a found family, but it's not a fantasy. And the first one that I thought of was one that I read fairly recently, and that was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This book features, like, I feel like the most shining example of found family that I can think of. It is such a lovely group of people who have found each other and created this adorable little family that you are rooting for and you cannot help but love. And there are all these kind of like misfits who have been outcast by societal norms and everything, and they come together and they have just a beautiful relationship, and I loved it so much. Next is a book with astronomy or space that is not necessarily science fiction. So if you're looking for a science fiction-y read, then I would say that, first of all, I don't read a lot of it, but Skyward by Brandon Sanderson I did really like. So if that was what you were looking for, even though I know you said like not necessarily, but I did want to give that option. But other than that, I would say Starry Eyes by Jen Bennett. This is a YA romance, but it features a main character who loves astronomy, and they end up like, it kind of ends up being a survival story sort of, where they are out in the California wilderness and, you know, they have free view of the stars and everything. It's definitely like something that is discussed quite a bit, the character's passion for astronomy. So I think that if that was something you were looking for, that book wouldn't disappoint. Next is a fantasy book that doesn't have confusing world building, but has a romance in it. And for this, I would recommend Of Fire and Stars by, oh my god, what is the author's name? Audrey Coulthurst? No, maybe not. I think that is the author's name. I'm too lazy to try and find it behind me, but this was a really, really cute romance, but it features a world that like isn't really complicated. I would say if you're looking for a fantasy that isn't too complicated with world building, try and look at something that has more of a historical base to it, where the world isn't so involved, and it would be more of like a romance focused fantasy. I feel like those are the ones that generally don't have that confusing of world building. Also, obviously going for a low fantasy or an urban fantasy, which is one that is like partially set in our world, that is usually a good way to go as well. Next is a dark and grim adventure story, and I would say that Unearthed by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner is a great one to go with. It's definitely a really adventurous story, but it also features like a super dark world and everything. Next is a World War I or II historical fiction for beginners, and I feel like historical fiction is a hard one for me to recommend a beginner's level one, because I don't know like what that would really look like. But I was thinking back on like what has been an easier read for me, and I would say that Prisoner of Night and Fog by Anne Blankman was a pretty easy historical fiction to start out with. This is a World War II historical fiction, and it's really risky, but like keeps you completely engrossed in the story. It's essentially about a girl who like, she knows Hitler very well, like he's her Uncle Hitler, and she grew up in that world and is obviously discovering that like it's not all what it seems after her father is killed, and she is finding out the truth of that. So it's like a really intense story, but honestly it wasn't a very difficult read. Next is a romance with a surprise pregnancy. So this one, like, it's not a spoiler because it is very prevalent to the story. I didn't want to say something where it's like at the end or whatever, because obviously that's going to be a spoiler then, but Ties That Tether by Jane Iharo, that features a pregnancy that is also a very prevalent part of the storyline, and it's a really interesting look at like how that shakes up the character's life and the fallout from that. Next is more books that are like Percy Jackson, and I feel like when I saw this one, there was a book that specifically came to mind, but I cannot think of it for the life of me now. But I did also think of Star Daughter by Shveta Thakrar. This is a story that deals with the daughter of God, like a star, and essentially like the stars are like gods, and it's not exactly like Percy Jackson, but it definitely does have like those mythological vibes to it, and having characters like teaming together and everything like that. So I thought it was a really good read. Next is a book with Gilmore Girls vibes, and first thing I thought of was One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. I read this past summer, actually. I personally listened to it on audiobook because the audiobook is actually narrated by Lauren Graham, who plays Lorelai on Gilmore Girls. So it was just perfect because it is a story that deals with that like mother-daughter relationship and that strong bond there, and it was like the two of them grew up together. It very much had Gilmore Girls vibes, just with like Italy thrown in there and kind of a little bit of a magical twist, and I just love the fact that she narrated it. Next is a book with non-binary rep, and for this I would recommend I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. They are a non-binary author themselves, and they actually have a new one out that I need to pick up, but this was such a great book about the experience of being non-binary. I like really felt for the main character, and I think it is a great read if this is what you're looking for. Next is a thriller book that is fast-paced with a shocking twist, and Ace of Spades is all that I have to say. Like, this book, man, wow, it blew my mind. Next is for people who want to get into fantasy more, and I would recommend Trisha Levenseller because her fantasies just like fly by. They are such quick reads. Specifically, Blade of Secrets is one of my favorites, but also Daughter of the Pirate King. Like, all of them just absolutely fly by, but I really loved Blade of Secrets, which is about a bladesmith, or what is it called? Blacksmith. That was the word that I was looking for, but essentially she ends up like making this weapon that is more powerful than she ever realized, and then has to go on the run with it, and it also features really great anxiety rep and a lovely sister relationship. Next is a book that feels like a hug that is not House in the Cerulean Sea, and I had a different answer for this one until this morning when I finished the book that I'm about to talk about, but I had originally said Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, which 100% feels like a hug. It is lovely, and Tokyo Ever After by Amiko Jean is another one. It's just so sweet and cute that it feels like a hug. But The Lost Ticket by Freya Sampson is a book that I don't think I will ever emotionally recover from. It was so freaking cute. I'm obsessed with it. It tugged on my heartstrings. It was like so emotional, but also felt like the cutest thing in the entire world. It's about this old man who has been riding the same bus for 60 years because he met a woman on it and then he lost her number, so he's trying to find her again, and he has been doing that for 60 years. And the main character, like, she ends up meeting him on the bus and decides to help him out. Finally, after 60 years, someone actually helps him out. But they go on this journey, like, trying to find this lost love. Oh my goodness, it was so much. It was so cute. Next is something for a fan of Colleen Hoover that is not one of her books, and I would say go to like any other romances. I particularly enjoy Christina Lauren. However, they're not as like steamy, so I don't know if that would be the first one that I would go to. I think that K.A. Tucker writes kind of similar romances, but they have like a little bit more of an emotional side to them. And I think Talia Hibbert actually would also be a really great one to go with because they also are quite steamy. And speaking of, the final recommendation that I'm going to give is for a book that has humor in it but also spice. Talia Hibbert, man, like, they are spicy, but they also are so funny. They make me laugh out loud. So Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and something Eve Brown. I can't remember. Am I getting those mixed up? I don't know. But basically, the Brown Sisters trilogy, so freaking good. And personally, I found the last two to be my favorites. I know a lot of people really love Chloe Brown because it's enemies to lovers. That's just not like my #1 favorite trope, but either way, you can't go wrong with these. They will make you laugh, but also they are definitely steamy. Okay, so those are all of the recommendations that I'm going to give you guys today. I feel like I did so many like rapid fire because I realized halfway through that I had a lot left, but I hope that it helped you guys out. I truly love doing these, and thank you guys for participating. Tomorrow for Bookmas Day 4, don't forget to come back because we have an exciting video of Bookmas, which is my best books of the year. I'm going to be giving you guys all of my favorite books of the year. I forget how many I'm gonna do, maybe 15. I feel like that's usually how many I do, but I'm so excited to just gush about books that I love. It is always so fun to like count down to that #1 book of the year because it is actually, like, unlike the other list that I usually do, it is one that I rank, and yeah, I just have a lot of fun with it. So I will see you guys with that video tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you then. I keep on messing up this outro, but you get the point. Bye!